Hello everybody and welcome back to a new video. My name is Sarah and today I'm here with some autumn reading recommendations. Now I did a summer reading recommendation video back in like May, early June, and I only had 5 books to recommend for that video. This video I have 10. I love autumnal themed books. I love like Gothic, dark academia, any sort of like creepy horror thriller, anything unsettling and weird. Like I really love reading those books, so it makes sense that I have quite a few recommendations for this kind of seasonal reading. So I'm gonna try to kind of go through these kind of quick, since I do have 10 recommendations. So I've kind of got these organized in terms of like different categories of books and different kind of genres or subgenres. Some of them kind of border on multiple genres, so I will kind of discuss that. But we're going to start with our Gothic books first. And so the first one that I have to recommend is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. So this is set in 1950s Mexico. Our main character, Noemi, is kind of a socialite, and she gets a letter from her cousin who just recently got married, and it's a really kind of foreboding letter that makes it sound like something is wrong where she's currently living with the family that she's married into, but you don't really know what it is. And so Noemi travels to their kind of reclusive estate to check on her cousin and see kind of what's going on and what she can do to help her cousin. And while she's there, some really strange things start happening, and this family that her cousin has married into is definitely not a normal family. So this deals a lot with white colonialism, and so which I found really interesting. But the reason why I recommend this for fall reading is because it is definitely set on like that secluded fog mist covered estate. It's very atmospheric, dark, and kind of gloomy. It also deals a lot with fungus, and so yeah, I just feel like this is a really good read if you want to get in kind of like that misty fog atmosphere of fall. So the next Gothic book that I have to recommend is a Southern Gothic novel, and that is The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. This is a very meandering plot, kind of following multiple perspectives that you really don't know how they truly come together until the very end. So we're following our main character growing up from when he's born to when he's like 18, 20-ish. We actually follow his parents and how they meet and then get married and have him, and kind of the tragedy that befalls his parents. We also follow a couple who are highway serial killers, and then we follow a traveling spider-eating preacher. There's also a couple other characters. There's the sheriff of kind of the main town. This happens kind of across a couple of different towns, but there's a sheriff of the main town that we follow, and then there's also a new preacher that comes in the main town. So we follow them as well. They don't take as much of like a main stage in the story, but they do play important parts. And this is a very gross novel. It's definitely a very unsettling novel, which is why I picked it for fall, and it's got that really gothic atmosphere. There's always this underlying sense of like foreboding, unsettlingness. There are quite a few trigger warnings for this book, so I do highly recommend looking into those. I feel like this is gonna sound weird, but it's almost got like a hygiene horror element to it. Like if you get really grossed out by poor hygiene and poor living conditions that are described in high amounts of detail, don't read this book, because Donald Ray Pollock does a really good job of describing that, and I found myself kind of gagging a couple times because it was just so gross. But yeah, if you just like that, not necessarily horror, but just this unsettling feeling throughout the entirety of the story, I would highly recommend picking this one up. It is very meandering at times, and at times you kind of don't know where the plot is going, as opposed to like Mexican Gothic, where that one obviously is slow, because Gothic novels tend to be slow. Yeah, The Devil All the Time, I had a couple points where I didn't really know where we were going with the story, but trust me, just stick with it. It is worth the read. So the last Gothic book that I have to recommend that actually kind of borders on dark academia, I would actually classify it as dark academia as well, is Madam by Phoebe Wynne. We follow a young woman in the 1990s. She is a classics teacher, so she teaches like ancient civilizations, ancient literature, and she gets a new job at this very prestigious all-girls boarding school. And so obviously, you know, she's very excited because it is a very prestigious position. It's a very kind of reclusive, selective boarding school. And while she's there, she quickly starts to learn that this school is very steeped in its traditions. And that turns very sinister and very unsettling rather fast. So this kind of has that old, almost castle-like school atmosphere, with all its little nooks and crannies and different turns. And there's definitely long passages of very dark academia-esque discussions between the teacher and the students. But it still has an overall Gothic feel to it. So I highly recommend this one. So then this is kind of a transition into dark academia recommendations. And of course, I have to recommend one of the two kind of pinnacle titles, and that is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I absolutely loved this book. I highly recommend actually listening to the audiobook of this if you get a chance. I think the narrator did a phenomenal job. I listened to it on Scribd, and I actually think that I enjoyed this book a lot more than what I would have necessarily enjoyed it if I read it in like the traditional sense. So we follow our main character who has just gotten out of prison because 10 years ago there was a murder in his close circle of friends. Him and I think it's 5 friends. They're all Shakespearean students, and you are kind of listening to him tell what actually happened 10 years ago leading up to the murder. They start during the fall of their final year of school, leading up to when the murder actually happens, and then past that. If you like closely knit, almost claustrophobic, messy relationships between various people, I think you will really enjoy this. You don't need to be super knowledgeable about Shakespeare in order to enjoy this story. I'm not a huge Shakespeare nut. I know the very basics, and I was able to follow the story just fine, and kind of some of the parallels that were drawn between some of the plays and the story itself. But yeah, I think if you like to kind of watch group dynamics unravel themselves, you will definitely enjoy this book. Then the next dark academia that I have to recommend is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. So in this book we follow Alex Stern, and she has fallen into a very shady, crime-riddled lifestyle, and one day she wakes up in a hospital after a multiple homicide amongst her group of friends, and she gets offered a full ride to Yale in exchange for being part of one of their underground secret societies. And so there are 8 main secret societies, and the Ninth House is the one that Alex is being recruited for, and this is the house that kind of oversees all of these other societies and keeps them in line. And so each of these societies all deals very heavily in their occult practices. They each kind of have their own specialty, and amongst all 8 of them, they end up producing and driving a lot of different world events. They have a heavy influence in world politics and world economics, and so Alex and the Ninth House are kind of in charge of making sure that they don't like go past certain boundaries. And so Alex agrees and she ends up going to Yale, and while there's a lot more that gets kind of uncovered. There's also a big murder mystery that plays a part in this story. It's definitely very spooky. We deal a lot with like the spirit world and kind of witchy activities. Obviously, it's set at school, so you've got like the academic vibe, and then there's the murder mystery. So I highly recommend picking this one up if kind of you're looking to maybe take your first step into a dark academia book, and you like more like spooky elements, because that definitely has this. This is another one that I would recommend checking out the trigger warnings for. It does have several. But yeah, I would highly recommend this one. This is the first in a series, actually, and this is the only one out in this series. I'm not sure when the second one comes out. I have not seen any announcements for that, and I have been waiting almost impatiently now. And then one that is kind of debated on whether or not it's considered dark academia or not is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I wanted to include this because I do think that it has just kind of that autumnal vibe to it. So this is actually the first book in the villains duology. I actually think it might be turning into a trilogy. There's been kind of rumors about that, but this is the first book, and we follow Victor and Eli. They used to be college roommates, and when they were in school, they decided that their kind of conjoined thesis was going to be looking at near-death experiences and how they produce extraordinaries, which are people that have extraordinary abilities, kind of like superpowers. So this ends up being taken way out of hand, and a huge accident occurs, which ends up winding Victor up in prison. And then this book kind of follows Victor getting out of prison and figuring out where Eli has wound up, and kind of him wanting to get revenge on Eli. This is a very snappy, fast-paced book. Much of this does not take place in the university, but it starts out there, and you have those very academic roots, which is why I wanted to recommend this one. So then the next book that I want to recommend is not one that I would necessarily classify as dark academia, but it does take place in a school, and it's got some like body horror elements to it, and so that is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This follows 3 girls. They live in kind of this like secluded boarding school on an island, and they have been quarantined because there's this huge outbreak of this like weird disease that causes them to have weird kind of body modifications and morphine. So it definitely deals highly with body horror, but it also deals with kind of the nature of the island as well. And it's just a very strange book. I wouldn't classify it as like strictly horror, but it does have kind of this unsettling, creepy vibe throughout the entirety of the book. And like I said, it takes place on this very secluded school on this secluded island, which is kind of a common theme of dark academia or kind of just fall-esque novels. So I would highly recommend checking this one out. And then kind of leaning more into the horror genre, I would recommend Horrid by Katrina Leno. So this follows Jane and her mother, and the two of them are moving back to the mother's family home after Jane's father just passed away. And so as they're moving in, obviously Jane has to go to a brand new school and deal with her grief and becoming the new kid. But while moving into the home, she realizes that it is quite odd. There's something strange with the house. There's weird noises, weird kind of occurrences that are quite unsettling. There's also a really strange rose garden in the back of the house. And there's a locked room that Jane's mother will not let Jane go into. And so it's kind of the story of obviously Jane dealing with her grief and kind of learning to find her place in this new school, but it deals very, very heavily with this house and kind of Jane unraveling the secrets of her mother's childhood, and what's behind the locked door, what's with the rose bush, and that kind of story. So if you're looking for a book that deals a lot with like the haunted house trope, I would highly, highly recommend this one. I think it did a very, very good job of it. And then the last kind of horror book that is also kind of a thriller as well, I would recommend The Shadows by Alex North. This is one of my favorite books that I read last year. I definitely think it's definitely like a thriller, but it borrows heavily from the horror genre, which is why I loved it so much, because it was so creepy. So this follows our main character, Paul, who is going back to his hometown because of his mother's declining health. But the reason why he originally left this town is because his group of friends from high school committed a murder. And so when he's coming back to this hometown, he is having to confront all of these memories that are then coming back. Meanwhile, the next town over, there's a copycat murder happening, and so he kind of starts getting slowly involved in kind of figuring out what's actually happening. And it's just one of those books that you don't know if what's happening is actually real or if it's supernatural. And it's definitely got some really, really creepy elements to it. And I found it to be one of those books that was super addicting and really, really hard to put down. So yeah, if you want books that are like questionably supernatural, questionably not, and you don't really know until the end, I would highly recommend this one. So then the last book that I had to recommend is one that I debated whether or not to put in, because this is a book by one of two authors that I talk about in nearly every video, but because of the autumnal theme, I literally could not put this book in, and that is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. The reason why I'm putting this in is because it literally deals with the Autumn Prince and the Autumn Court, but it's very different than all the books that I have previously recommended. All of those other books have the very dreary, foggy, foreboding, dark kind of vibe of autumn, while this one has the very vibrant, brightly colored vibe of autumn. Think of like one of those days where all the trees are like fully turned to like all their oranges, their yellows, their reds, and the sun is out and it's shining through and the world looks like it's on fire, but in a good way. That's kind of the atmosphere of this book. So we follow our main character, who is a painter, and she lives in a world where humans and fae coexist. But the fae cannot like create anything, and so that's kind of where the humans come in, where the humans are the ones that paint or make clothes or cook or anything like that. And so our main character Isabel is a painter, and she paints portraits for the fae, and one day the Autumn Prince comes and asks for a portrait. Isabel paints him with human emotion, which is a huge no-no in this world, and so the Autumn Prince arrests her and takes her back to the Autumn Court to be tried for her crime. And on their way there, they fall in love and they fall into some kind of danger and shenanigans, and I just really, really love this book. So if you're looking for more of a bright autumn book, I would highly recommend this one. So those are my autumn recommendations. Hopefully there's something in there for you. I tried to kind of pick from various different autumnal themes. Let me know if you've read any of these. If you have any recommendations of your own, I'd love to hear them. Like I said, this is kind of like one of my favorite themes of books, is kind of those autumnal vibes. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you consider sticking around and subscribing, but as always, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!